Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We are presented by CLNS Media. Today on the show, it's our weekly podcast with Cole Zwicker. I'm sorry, I think this is the latest in the week that we have podcasted, Cole. How's it going, buddy? How has your day been?
It's been a little bit of a slow Friday, and my apologies for the lateness in the week. I came down with a sickness on Wednesday, so it put me out of operation, but good to be back, and it's almost the best time of the year with the trade deadline.
Cole had the itis on Wednesday, apparently, so that will never be a good thing to hear, but we're here on Friday. We're going to talk about some NBA trade deadline stuff, some movement that has happened already, and then we're going to talk about Mohamed Bamba, I believe, correct? And Lonnie Walker at the end.
Yes, sir.
So, in general, it's been an eventful day, I would say. Greg Monroe has signed. Nikola Mirotic got signed yesterday. Mike Scotto over at The Athletic, shout out Mike Scotto, released some interesting news and notes that I think are probably worth exploring. But let's start with Greg Monroe. So Greg Monroe is going to sign a 1-year, $5 million deal to go play for the Boston Celtics. What was your immediate reaction to, I would say, let's start here. Whenever you heard that Greg Monroe was getting bought out by Adrian Wojnarowski, what was your initial response in terms of where the best fit was?
I mean, the obvious answer was probably the Pelicans at the time, just because it was so needed with Boogie Cousins' injury. But you also knew that their flexibility was somewhat limited, being hard capped. They didn't have the same spending power as Boston with their disabled player exception, which allowed them to spend the $8.4 million disabled player exception, the non-tax MLE amount. So they could outspend the Pelicans, but my initial reaction was I kind of expected him to go play with Anthony Davis. The idea was bringing in Nikola Mirotic, which he was going to be the third big for them, and come off the bench because Davis doesn't like to start at the 5. So when Boston ended up outspending them, I wasn't super shocked just because, like we'll probably discuss in a second, Monroe's still a pretty quality rotation big. It's just, my mind initially went to the Pelicans. I thought that was like the clear-cut fit.
Yeah, I thought that made sense. I thought that the Thunder made sense, just given some of their issues in the front court. I thought that San Antonio made sense, given that Joffrey Laverne is seeing like pretty real backup center minutes right now. I also thought Boston made sense, though. Obviously, they have the disabled player exception. They were going to be able to pay him more than anyone. And Greg Monroe is kind of proving here that, A, he wants to be serious about winning, but also that, B, money matters. Money should matter, even though Greg Monroe has made probably, let's see, I actually have his basketball reference page up. So Greg Monroe has made $52 million over the course of his career, plus whatever he made this year from Phoenix. We don't really know what the terms of their buyout were yet. He was on pace to make $17.8 million. I would imagine he's probably going to get something like $14 to $15 million of that at the end of the day. So what do you think of the Boston fit in terms of scheme and in terms of roster and positional need?
What they like from their bigs is a little bit more of the playmaking aspect, the screening, the passing from the high post. We see that a lot with Horford, and they run their offense that way. Like their two primary creators on offense are Kyrie and Horford in the center of the court, and their wings kind of work off them. Monroe definitely brings that passing element, the screening. He's a great screener as far as his girth, and he just plays really hard. And that's going to get you a long way in the playoffs when you have a veteran like that who just knows where to be on the court. He can fit in Boston's kind of motion scheme, make the reads out of the high post. He can also play in the low post, of course, can exploit mismatches. So offensively, I think he gives them a lot of versatility. And then defensively, I mean, he's not great in space. But again, he's a guy who can box out. He works hard, and he kind of fits that Brad Stevens mold of just guys that they want 100% effort from everybody all the time. So I really like the fit. Even if you don't think he's a quality starter, I think he's a quality rotation player. And if you're getting that for basically free, I mean, you're paying $5 million for it, which is like $13 million prorated for the entire year. It's a good chunk of change, actually, that Monroe got from Boston, but it's not costing them any assets. So it makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
no, I think that Monroe gets kind of a shitty rap, to be honest. I think that he's actually a really useful basketball player when he's on the floor, and you mentioned the fit in terms of the way that he likes to operate on the floor. He's someone that's very comfortable in dribble handoff settings, which is a place where Al Horford has become so incredibly valuable for Boston, right? They run that handoff play with him and Kyrie where they can flip. Now, obviously, Monroe is not as mobile as Horford. You can't really do the same actions in terms of screen setting, but you can still kind of use Monroe as an Al Horford light who also can't really step back and shoot threes in dribble handoff settings, which is interesting, right?
Yep.
The other kind of, I would say, like, at least notable thing about this Greg Monroe signing is the way that he performed in the playoffs last year. So Monroe last year in the playoffs for Milwaukee, they played Toronto, if I remember correctly, right?
Yes.
So he averaged 20 points, 11 rebounds, 4.3 offensive rebounds, by the way, and shot 53% from the field over the course of per 36 minutes. That was a very, very useful contribution as a backup center for Milwaukee. That's where he is probably at his best now, is killing second units and being something of an offensive hub for second units. So I think that as long as he continues to kind of play in that mode and play in that role, he's going to be valuable for Brad Stevens. He's a really, really smart, intuitive player that I think should be able to get up to speed pretty quickly in that scheme.
Yeah, he's ideally exactly what you noted, that second unit kind of bucket getter guy who can also rebound. That's kind of the position and the role I've kind of wanted for Julio Okafor, but he's just not the same high-intensity player and rebounder. Monroe's a really smart team defender as well. Like, he knows where to be, and you can compensate for some of the lack of athleticism with just the high work ethic and the high motor. So we're talking about a guy who could potentially play next to Al Horford in some matchups. I mean, the spacing is going to be crunched, but they're both good enough passers where you think that Brad Stevens can concoct something that will work spacing-wise with certain actions. So he gives them some versatility. I mean, Aaron Baines has given them pretty good minutes this year, but you're just adding another big outside of Theus to the equation. Why wouldn't you do that? I mean, if it's not costing you anything and you're just getting a valuable kind of rotation, experienced big who has been in big moments and just adding to your depth in the playoffs, I think that's a great move.
So here's going to be just kind of, I don't want to make a counter argument necessarily even, because I do think that it's a smart signing for them. What I do want to bring up, though, is the idea of opportunity cost with this designated player exception, right? So let's say that Brook Lopez gets bought out by the Lakers, or Kentavious Caldwell-Pope gets bought out by the Lakers. Do you think that they could have waited to use this, or do you think they should have just pounced now, got a guy who can help them, and just kind of deal with what they got?
I think a bird in hand in this situation is probably a little bit better. You just don't know how the buyout situation is going to work, and we do know that the rest of their disabled player exception is extinguished now. It's not like the non-tax mid-level where you can use it on different players. It's just for one guy, so the rest of that 3 million plus is gone. But it's hard to project who's going to get bought out. I would be kind of surprised if Kentavious got bought out. Maybe Brook Lopez does. Maybe they agree to some buyout agreement. But again, you're just putting a lot of stock in something that's uncertain. And we know that Monroe, if Boston wasn't interested, he probably would have gone to the Pelicans. So there was demand for him. So I think in this case, there's probably not like a considerable upgrade between Monroe and Lopez. Lopez might be the better overall fit just because he can shoot threes. But I don't think that difference is like startling to where waiting on potentially Lopez and letting Monroe go would be worth the risk. But I don't know. That's really tough when we talk about market dynamics at the trade deadline and buyout season. A lot can happen. Yeah, no,
I do think Brook Lopez is a better player than Greg Monroe. I will say, though, that I think, as I mentioned at the top here, Greg Monroe is a pretty underrated player. He can be useful in that scheme. I am a little bit skeptical on how valuable he's actually going to be for them. As you mentioned, Al Horford is there. Aaron Baines has actually been really good so far this year. He's better than Aaron Baines, but the upgrade from Baines to like Monroe is going from like the 40th best center in the league to the 30th best center in the league. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like you're getting like some massive upgrade over the course of the 20 minutes a night that Greg Monroe is going to play.
Yeah, it's not a difference-making move as far as it's not going to put them over the edge competing for a championship likely. It's just adding quality depth to your rotation that you know. We've talked about this all the time with Boston. They know what players they can optimize, and you got to think they have a pretty good plan for Monroe.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think that's probably a good place to end it. Let's go on ahead and move on to the Nikola Mirotic trade. So finally, the deal with the New Orleans Pelicans has gone through. We talked about this between Danny and I on the podcast on Wednesday, but it's worth kind of going through what the final details of the deal were. So Nikola Mirotic is going from Chicago to New Orleans. New Orleans has guaranteed the second year of Nikola Mirotic's contract. So he's going to be under contract for next season as well. To get Mirotic, the Pelicans sent a 2018 first-round pick that is startlingly minimally protected. Omer Asik, who has 3 years, 36 million, something like that, 34 million left. But in terms of guarantees after this year, it's only like 14 million, right?
Yeah, the last year the contract, I believe, is only 1 million guaranteed. So it's not as much as you think.
It's
3 million. Yes,
it's cheap to get off of his money, and there's actually something that could help the Bulls that I'll explain in a minute. There, they also get Tony Allen and Jameer Nelson. Apparently, they're going to keep Jameer Nelson and get rid of Tony Allen. Is that right?
I only heard they were keeping Jameer Nelson. I didn't hear what they're going to do with Tony Allen, but definitely yes on Jameer.
So, how much does Nikola Mirotic help the New Orleans Pelicans?
I mean, he definitely helps. I think Mirotic is another underrated player. He can defend a little bit in space, and you think about the versatility of lineup with Davis at the 5, Mirotic at the 4, who can add that floor spacing, a little bit of playmaking element to the 4 position. He's clearly better than anything else they have that they could probably put there. So I think there's an upgrade, but contextualizing it as far as competing for the playoffs, and maybe it does make the difference in them making the playoffs or not. That might be fair enough to say that he has that kind of impact, but it's not really going to move the needle for them, obviously. And it's just interesting. Somebody tweeted this out, that the Pelicans have traded every first-round pick, either the player or the pick, since Anthony Davis. So they've never kept a first-round pick post drafting Anthony Davis. So this is kind of goes with their MO of they're going to usually move their first-rounder for short-term help. It has not worked in the past as much. I mean, the Boogie trade was great. We'll be clear about that. That was just an unfortunate situation with him this year. Injuries happen, and it sucks. But overall, I do think Mirotic will help them short-term. And, of course, he had to guarantee that second year, or at least the Pelicans did, so they wouldn't need his permission to do the deal. So he's locked in at $12.5 million this year. I think he's a good fit next to Davis, but ideally I thought it would be like a third big situation where you could just play a lot of smaller lineups with him and Davis together that could maintain the height, but also give you the skill. So I like the deal. I think as far as the player, I like the deal, but I don't agree with the philosophy of the lightly protected pick and just the continuing practice by the Pelicans to trade first rounders.
It's kind of a like death spiral situation, right? Where you trade your first round picks in 2014, for instance, and you do it for short-term help. And you keep trying to get into a situation where you're prioritizing the short term versus the long term, because with a guy like Anthony Davis, and I think Washington's a good example of this as well, with a guy like John Wall before he signed his contract last year, and they thought they had to continually get short term help by moving each of their first round picks in the 2 years preceding that. You get into this mindset where to keep the superstar you've got, you have to move first round picks because they aren't going to be good enough to get there whenever our superstar is in the right stage of his career. And whenever, you move 2014, the guy that you could have drafted in 2014, this would be the time that he would be helping you. Like, this would be the time and place where if you selected properly, this is where he can actually benefit you in year 3 and year 4. Prioritizing the short term, only the 25th pick in the draft, it's just mismanagement to me. It's not a great plan to do it year after year after year.
I totally agree. It's cutting corners essentially, and you're short circuiting your rebuild. Like, think if they actually added a core to Anthony Davis every year, but instead they've traded those picks to try to get better in the short term. And where are they now? I mean, they're still kind of in no man's land, and Davis's years on his contract are running up, and he's probably not going to stay if he stays that long. I mean, he's going to have other opportunities, ample other opportunities on the market, and it's just an example of team building, and it's just not going right for them. And I think people can learn from this. Other teams can learn from this, and if you're going to deal your first-round picks every year and you're not going to get the return on your investment, because you usually don't in trades or in free agency, it's just tough to accumulate those kinds of assets. They made a great deal for Boogie. I think that was actually that was one I would have done for sure, no hesitation. I think that was the one that was the most defensible. I mean, the principal guy they dealt in that trade was Buddy Hield. I'm fine doing that. But some of the other moves they made from the off, just how they immediately started with the Drew Holiday, Nerlens Noel stuff, it just set the tone, and that's proceeded to now. And even though I do like Mirotic as a player, I think they can help him. I just philosophically, it just doesn't make sense, this accumulation of all these traded picks. I don't know. It's kind of frustrating to watch a team do this to Anthony Davis when you could have considered what would have been if they would have operated in a different fashion. Well,
just look how Boston has kind of operated their system, right? I mean,
yep.
they've done a great job of just continually replenishing with terrific picks. And obviously, the Nets allowed them to stack the deck essentially with prospects. But at the same token, they've done a really good job of hitting on guys like Terry Rozier, which was a pick that was panned at the time. And Shemi Ojeleye is a, first-round talent last year that falls to the second round. They've done a really good job of just kind of building out their roster with smart rotation players who can actually help them, going forward. Marcus Smart was a guy who went, if I remember correctly, number 6. He's probably lived up to being a top 10 pick, maybe not number 6, but just filling out the roster with role players and allowing them to develop over the course of their career is really beneficial, I think, to your star and your potential star players.
You have to build sustainably, in my opinion, long term. You have to try to plan for both, but you have to always have long term prioritized because you never know what's going to happen short term. There could be a massive injury or whatnot, and if you just dump all your assets away and you're not building, if you don't stockpiling any kind of future capital, that's just a tough way to build your franchise. I realize that the Pelicans are 7th right now and they want to make the playoffs. I don't know if that looks better to AD, though, making the playoffs versus actually acquiring core pieces. Drew Holiday's been fantastic for them this year, but outside of him, AD and Boogie, they just had really no depth. It's not like they're going to threaten any of these elite teams right now because, for one, the teams are just too damn elite, and two, they just don't have the requisite pieces to kind of compete with these guys. I just think it goes to like this disconnect between building sustainably and building, short term and trying to appease your star when that's probably not in even his best interest to do that.
Right. Like, I think a lot of people think of stars as like dumb in some way. Like, oh yeah, we're going to trick our star into signing by making the 7th seed in the playoffs and, crashing out of the playoffs. It's not how it goes. 2 questions on Nikola Mirotic here. First, they made this deal before Greg Monroe decided to sign in Boston. Would you have rather made this deal for Nikola Mirotic, or would you have rather just signed Greg Monroe if Monroe was willing to go there?
That's really tough. I mean, I'd probably Monroe just because it wouldn't have cost the pick compensation. I think the only way it really made that much sense, though, is if you got both and you really had that, rotation from your big spots. Like, they just signed Terrence Jones to a 10-day contract.
That actually that's not happening now, apparently, according to Shams.
Oh, really? Okay, well, I guess they got. Well, yeah. So I think they're starting Ajinça at the 5 now. I don't know. So it's tough because it made sense if you're going to go all in, sign both or sign Monroe, trade for Mirotic. Then you actually have like a decent rotation in your 4 and 5 positions. It just doesn't make as much sense now. But I would always go if it's not going to put you over the top. I would always go the avenue that doesn't cost you a first-round pick.
So. The second question I have for you in that case is, I think I agree with you for what it's worth, but we don't know if Greg Monroe was actually willing to sign there or not.
Correct.
The second question is, if you're Nikola Mirotic, would you have actually wanted this option to kick into place, or this non-guarantee to be guaranteed? Because you could have hit the market this year, and right now, he's averaging 17 points a game, 6 rebounds, 2 assists. He is 47% from the field, 43% from 3. He's having an awesome year. Typically, I think the idea would be that in a season like this where, in your 4th year, you're kind of breaking out at 26, 27 years old, you'd want to hit the market right after that. But we obviously know that there are some different market factors this summer in terms of money available. So I ask you, if you were Nikola Mirotic, would you have wanted this contract to become guaranteed for year 2 at $12.5 million?
I think so. Just because $12.5 million next year that's a legit chunk of change in this market, honestly, for a 4. Like, he's a 4 only kind, and I don't know what the market would be for him, even if he's unrestricted. It's just really hard to predict with such. The cap space is not what it used to be. 2019, it should start to open up a little bit again. So maybe he capitalizes one more time on a big contract before he's 30, of course. So that I don't have enough intel to really answer that confidently, but I think I would probably take the 12.5, even if he could have gotten like 3 years, 30 million, maybe a little bit less. If he produced like this, I don't know, maybe a little bit more, maybe 3 years, 33 million, something along those lines. But maybe he can still get that deal in the future if he continues to produce like this over a 2-year span, and New Orleans proves to be a good destination for him as far as getting him stats. He continues this production. I think that he can still land a deal like that. He's still young enough to where it's not going to really kill him long term if he continues to produce. And $12.5 million again is a pretty substantial chunk of change to play on next year in this market.
Yeah, to me, it's almost the difference between, okay, I could sign for maybe 3 years, $30 million this summer, or I could get $12.5 million next year and re-enter the marketplace the next summer.
Exactly.
I don't know which I'd rather have, to be honest. I don't know that he could make a wrong decision in this case, but it's an imperfect decision, basically, no matter what he was going to do. So I just thought it was an interesting question to pose because it's such a difficult, I mean, it's kind of like game theory, which is fucking hilarious given the name of this podcast, but like you really have to kind of theorize everything out. Let's go on ahead and move on. Joakim Noah is apparently being sent home from the Knicks, or he's just going home. I mean, Joakim Noah's not playing. He's not really an NBA level talent anymore, just given the way the NBA has gone. My first question to you is this the worst free agency signing in NBA history? Because I think for me it is. I think it is.
It definitely is off the top of my head. I mean, I'm sure there were probably worse ones in the past, but this one stands out even amongst that disaster summer. It stands out as probably the worst. At the time, it was even horrendous. Nobody really knows what was going on. I mean, he apparently caused Courtney Lee to go there. I don't think Courtney Lee's the kind of player that you want to invest Joakim Noah just to make sure that happens. So, yeah, it's a bad one.
Like, it's definitely worse than Timofey Mozgov. I think it's worse than Deng, because Deng at least started 50 games last year and was not good, but was, whatever. He was Luol Deng.
Yep.
He's also apparently like a useful leader in that locker room. I think that the one that might stand out is maybe Jan Mahinmi. Like, Mahinmi's close to that, but it's a bigger deal. And to be honest, the Noah deal is a bigger deal than the Mahinmi deal. And Mahinmi is still at least like a rotation player in the NBA. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he's serviceable. I mean, he's he's your backup. He's on a high level, and he's definitely not worth this contract. But with Noah, the point of relevance or relativity is not a rotation player. It's like he's not an NBA player right now.
Yeah, like, I don't know that it would be worth signing him to a minimum contract right now. Like, Bismack Biyombo, Jan Mahinmi, these guys would have no problem getting, I think, $3 to $4 million on the open market. But that's what they are. They're worth like $3 to $4 million on the open market. Maybe in Biyombo's case, slightly more if you believe in him. But that's what they're worth. Noah's just not worth that at all. He's just not a good basketball player anymore. So that kind of brings up what the Knicks can do here. And they have a few fundamental options, I think. So I'll let you kind of start with, what do you think their options are?
I think their first option would be to try to trade him, and that's going to be a very select, probably impossible endeavor, but it's only going to be to a couple situations. I want to let you talk about the Charlotte idea because I think that was really good. I was just perusing the list really quickly, and you're looking for kind of similar contracts that are kind of dead money sunk costs. There's a couple of those in the same summer, like Mozgov for the Nets, but we talked about he's still like a functional player for them. But the Nets are in a position where if you offered them maybe a couple second-round picks as a sweetener, would they consider it with the stance they are? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But it would take something like that. I would look to trade him. Of course, that's probably what they're going to do, other than stretch him. I think stretching is always a last resort for me. But I would definitely entertain trades first, then stretching, or just literally just send him home and still have the cap sheets, unless you know for sure it's going to result in some kind of opportunity cost arising in free agency. If you can sign a certain player that you want and stretching him makes sense, I would consider it then, but I wouldn't consider it before that point. I would just rather just send him home and still pay him.
I agree. So here's the deal with trading him, right? Any of the other contracts signed during that summer, I don't think that it's worth trading him for. Like, even the big outsized Mozgov deal, the Mahinmi deal, trading him for those deals doesn't really make sense to me at all, unless the team trading for him. No, it doesn't make sense to me at all, because he's worse than any of those guys, and he's not going to be useful to you. Where I think you could consider a trade is if you're a team that is looking to get off of longer term money for whatever cost you can retain back. So, like, my kind of sort of idea was like, maybe Charlotte decides we really need to get off of this Nikola Batum money. He's at $77 million guaranteed over the course of the next 3 years, because there's no way he's opting out of a $27 million team option in 2021. Batum is still certainly a serviceable basketball player who would help the Knicks this year, but going forward, he has about $40 million more than Noah guaranteed after this year, if I remember correctly on that money. And that would hamstring the Knicks going forward, but they would get something in return. Like if you could do Noah and a second-round pick for Nikola Batum, Charlotte saves $40 million. Maybe that's something that's valuable to them. And the Knicks get a better player who's still not worth his salary, but someone who can actually help them a little bit.
There's definitely logic to it. I think that's a deal. That's the kind of deal they're going to have to entertain. It's going to have to involve a bigger money contract and some kind of incentive to move off of that from another team. They're going to have to probably add a sweetener in some capacity because, again, we're talking about comparison between a rotation player and a non-rotation player who, by all accounts in New York, has actually been a negative in the locker room. So that's like kind of the most damning thing is he's not someone who even like peak Noah, who was a team guy or whatnot. That's not who he's been with New York, allegedly. So that diminishes his value as well. Nobody wants to have a cancer in their locker room, especially somebody who used to be a star-level talent and isn't anymore. I think that's probably a difficult situation to deal with.
Yeah, no, I mean, I 100% agree. If I was Charlotte, I would not trade Nikola Batum for Joakim Noah. I'm just saying, like, okay, if there's an ownership situation that wants to get off of money, I think that that's the kind of circumstance where you could see a trade. You know what I'm saying?
For sure. 100%.
The stretch options for him are also relatively interesting, just kind of given their salary cap sheet going forward here. So I would say that stretching him is probably not something I would do. I would probably just send him home. But right now, this is what they've got on the books. So they have $68 million guaranteed next year. Let's go on ahead and make that 86 once Enes Kanter, opts into his $18.6 million option, because that's almost certainly going to happen. I would be pretty surprised if Ron Baker does not opt into his $4.5 million option. So that jumps you up to right around $91 million or so in terms of guarantees. Now, they could stretch Joakim Noah this summer. They would have to pay him $7.5 million over the course of each of the next 5 seasons. But that would get them down to like $80 million guaranteed in money next year. And that actually is a decent chunk of change this summer. It's not quite max cap space, but if it's the difference between them being able to realistically offer Julius Randle like a very real offer sheet, it's still probably not something I would advise, but it's something worth considering at least, right?
Yeah, that would be, if it's worth the opportunity cost. I'm not sure if Randall is that caliber of player, but I get the fit. I mean, the fit with Porzingis with Randall is great, but conceptually, I understand what you're saying conceptually. I think you might be able to justify it in certain settings. If you waive him before that August 31st deadline, or by August 31st, then it's at 5 years or 7.5. After that, then you have to keep that 2018 salary on the books at $18.5 million. So if they do feel like there's a guy that moves the needle for them, either as far as it's developing their core right now, so if he's a conducive fit next to Ntilikina and Porzingis, he optimizes them in better fashion. If that guy's Randall and you have to stretch Noah to accomplish that, I think that's more justifiable. I still side with you, though. I would not stretch him. I would just send him home. I think you can just endure the last 2 years of his contract, unless like 2019 rolls around and there's a lot more cap space and you feel like you can actually get in the market with a lot of these guys. And even then, I mean, you can stretch them over 3 years. Then I don't know. This is a tough calculus. I always side against. I'm philosophically against stretching unless you absolutely have to.
Right. And I mean, like, they could just keep him on the books for next year and stretch him in 2019 or the summer of 2019. I mean, it all depends on what their, chances are of signing a difference maker this summer versus a difference maker next summer. If they would stretch him in the summer of 2019, they would. It's hard to say how much money they would actually have, just because Lance Thomas theoretically can come off the books there. They also have to do the Kristaps Porzingis extension that summer, or will they extend him this summer? We don't know that yet. Like, they could easily extend Porzingis this summer, but he's got a $17 million cap hit in 2019 that is going to significantly hamper what their maneuverability is anyway. So if I was them, if I was going to stretch him, I think I would probably do it this year instead of waiting. But I mean, again, it just depends on what your options are this summer and if you can actually sign a difference maker.
I agree, and I think the Porzingis point was good as far as his cap hit, but I think he's going to agree to an extension. I do firmly believe that this summer he will probably lock something up. The 5 year.
Here's the thing, though. If you're extending Porzingis this summer, then you're putting his cap hit on the books for 2019, and that limits your salary cap space for that year anyway.
Exactly.
So you really should be focusing on this summer then to try and do something.
Yes, that makes a lot. That's what I was kind of getting at. I do think the likelihood in their first prerogative is locking up Porzingis. A lot of people bring up, cap space and stuff like that, but if you get a chance to lock in your franchise guy for 5 years and via extension, you should probably do that. So that leans the analysis more towards what you were saying, 2018. If you're going to open up room, it makes the most sense to stretch Noah then. I would agree with that, but again, it comes down to what the opportunity cost is, who are the players available. Is Julius Randle really a guy you want to waive or stretch Noah for? Maybe. I mean, that's up to them. I don't really know what their course of action is going to be. I never really know with the Knicks.
Yeah, I don't really have a great answer for this, to be honest, just because, is capping yourself out long term for Julius Randle the smartest decision you can make? I don't really think so, but
nope.
We'll see, I guess. I mean, they can get down to what? Let's see, 17 million. I mean, they can have very real cap space in 2019 anyway, even with the Porzingis extension if they would want to. And that's assuming they keep their books clean this summer without mid-level money long term and all of that. Then who knows what the Knicks are going to do. But I don't think it's impossible that they stretch Noah. I think that you can make a case for doing it if you get the right guy.
I would agree with that, and it's the Knicks, so it's definitely possible.
Right, but I mean, even just from a logical perspective, not even a Knicks perspective, All right, so let's move on real quick to a report from The Athletic. Shout out Michael Scotto, who is now working there. He has reported that the Orlando Magic are quietly gauging the trade market on Aaron Gordon. This seems not smart to me. What was your initial reaction when you heard that?
I wasn't completely surprised, honestly, just because we talked about the regime change with them. They drafted Jonathan Isaac, who plays conceptually the same position as Gordon. Gordon's up for restricted free agency. Conceptually a big payday. We don't know how the restricted free agent market's been really tepid recently outside of Otto Porter, who's kind of an outlier because of his shooting ability. Gordon has regressed there. He's about just below league average from three now. It depends. I mean, I could understand if you're Orlando and you're not going anywhere, do you want to pay Aaron Gordon $22, $23 million a year? But conversely, who else are you really going to pay? You know what I mean? He still has upside at his age. He's improved this year. But if you could get, I don't know, the Nets pick for him, something along that caliber of asset, not necessarily that would be available, but something along those lines, and you're a rebuilding team who's going to focus on the current regime. You want your own guys in the building. If you are John Hammond and you don't believe in Aaron Gordon long term and you don't want to pay him this enormous contract he's probably going to get, I could understand at least looking around, doing your due diligence and seeing, what is available for him.
So if you're Orlando, you have $78 million already on the books for next year. That is not including Elfrid Payton's, what is his cap hold? It is going to be
almost $10 million, it looks like.
Yeah. So you have essentially $88 million on the books for next year already. So you're not going to be a player in free agency unless you can get off some significant money long term. What is the goal here for you, I guess? You're trying to accumulate talent. Trading your most talented player, who is still only 22 years old, does not seem to me to be a super intelligent move unless you're using him to get off of other money. Like if you're using Aaron Gordon to also get off of Bismack Biyombo's money and trying to like kickstart this rebuild relatively quickly, and you think you can be a player in free agency because you're in Florida where there are very low to negligible state income taxes and you can live in sunshine and stuff like that. Like Orlando has certainly pitched itself in the past as being a strong free agency destination. If you think you can do that, maybe I get it, but I'm not just like trading Aaron Gordon for just like a lottery pick, because the Nets pick, let's say it's number 6 or so in the NBA draft, you're going to be lucky if that number 6 pick turns into someone who is as good as Aaron Gordon, I think. Just full stop. Like Aaron Gordon has lived up to his draft slot. And if you're trading your best player, I don't want to just get a lottery ticket in return. I would need a lottery ticket plus additional roster flexibility.
And that's probably what they think, too. Just thinking about it conceptually in this draft, I think I would probably do the 6th pick for Gordon if you're looking at guys who might be available just because it's such a special draft. But I get what you're saying as far as Gordon is a solidified piece. He's a young core piece. He's proven himself. But in this draft specifically, I think I would probably go to around 7 or 8 before I would start to get dicey on a Gordon deal. So some interesting trades that I came up with, just team-wise, like fit-wise, like Utah would be kind of interesting, but they have the 11th pick. You wouldn't do the 11th pick for Aaron Gordon, would you?
No. It would need to be the 11th pick. I would need to get probably Rodney Hood in return with the 11th pick. And
that's exactly what my deal was, yeah.
Yeah, I would also probably need to get off of Nikola Vucevic. Got it.
Yeah, I think that there are workable deals in that range. I'm kind of the same. I'm not giving Gordon away. Hell no. But if I can get an asset that's legitimate, if I'm Orlando and I'm not going anywhere, I'd rather invest. I'd rather trade Gordon for a high-value pick than I would to clear salary. I just don't care about clearing salary if I'm Orlando because you're not going to have that significant of salary anyway. And look at the last time you had cap space. What did you do? Bismack Biyombo. Like DJ Augustine. Like these guys aren't going to move the needle. I'd rather invest. If I'm going to trade Gordon, it better be for a principal draft pick or a principal young player. So like that's why Utah kind of makes a little bit of sense because they have the principal draft pick potentially at 11. That's still maybe a little low for my liking, but with Hood, I think that would be a little justifiable, even though I'm not the biggest Rodney Hood guy. But a deal like that, that's the deal. If I was Orlando, I would entertain those options, but I'm not trading him with Biyombo just to get off Biyombo's salary if I'm not getting like a primary piece back, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like I'm not doing that either. And honestly, like I'm just not going to trade Aaron Gordon, I guess, if I'm them. Like I'm going to ride with Aaron Gordon as my centerpiece going forward, as someone that I can build around. I'm going to be happy with the number, a top 3 pick probably in this year's NBA draft and just kind of ride it out. Like I think that they're in such a bad place in terms of what their salary cap situation is that it's almost impossible to me to figure out how they get out of it. Do you try and use Elfrid Payton to get out of that money? Do you try and use they have no one else to even use to get out of that money? Like they have Aaron Gordon, Elfrid Payton, and Jonathan Isaac. Like they've already dumped Mario Hezonja essentially. I don't think Jonathan Simmons is getting anything all that interesting, even though I think he's a pretty useful player. Yvonne Fournier is not worth his contract. Terrence Ross is probably slightly overpaid. There's just so much dead money on this cap sheet that they, I think, would behoove themselves to just let these contracts ride out into the sunset. Let Biyombo make $17 million in 2018, 2019, and 2019, 2020. Let Vucevic's contract run out. And maybe try and trade him next trade deadline for something small. Let Terrence Ross's contract run out and trade him for something next summer that's small. And just build. Like, just try and build. Maybe even, like, consider taking on more money, if I could, to get a better asset. But I wouldn't be moving my only real, like, full stop valuable asset in Aaron Gordon.
I definitely side more with you on this. I would only do it again in a very specific circumstance where the asset was legitimate. Like, in my opinion, top 7 in this class is probably justifiable if you're Orlando's regime. But you also have to consider, like, the team that Aaron Gordon goes to, they're just sacrificing so much leverage if they give up an asset for him, right? If he's going to be a restricted free agent, that basically means you have to pay him. And, like, his camp's going to know that, because if you invest a first-round pick, if you're Utah and you trade Hood and the 11th pick for Gordon conceptually. I know that Hood's a restricted free agent anyway, but you sacrificed a lottery pick potentially in this draft. You kind of have to resign him. So that's going to, factor into these negotiations. Like, another trade I came up with just off the top of my head was like something to do with Phoenix and like Marquise Christian, like TJ Warren. It would have to be more than that, like plus a draft pick. Warren's difficult because of the poison pill with his extension, but just conceptually like that, Phoenix would then know that they have to re-sign Aaron Gordon, and then that increases Gordon's leverage to demand more. Like, he could demand, I don't know, $24 million a year.
Right.
Do you really want to pay? That's my issue, is like, do you really want to pay Aaron Gordon that much money? I mean, if you're Orlando, there's no real opportunity cost, and I think that's what kind of you were getting into. They're not going to spend that on anybody else anyway, so it's not a big deal.
Yeah, no, like, I would just pay the money to Aaron Gordon and deal with it. Like, the place that does make sense in that regard is Cleveland. Like, if Cleveland did decide we wanted to give up Brooklyn pick for Aaron Gordon and Orlando just decided, fuck it, we're going to give it up. We're going to give up Aaron Gordon. We want our own guys in here. John Hammond, Jeff Weltman. We want to draft our players that fit our specific scheme. Because Cleveland, if LeBron leaves, they're not going to have a problem paying him whatever the hell he wants. If LeBron stays, they're going to be way over the fucking cap anyway, so you might as well just pay him. You know what I mean? Like, that's the situation where it makes sense. I mean, Phoenix, you're hamstringing yourself. I agree with you. There are just too many other places where you're hamstringing yourself.
Cleveland was the only deal that I really liked. That was the only one that I actually had in my tier 1 as far as the Nets pick. That would work compensation-wise for Orlando probably. And then Gordon can conceptually help LeBron. I'm not sure if he's quite a good enough shooter off the ball to play off LeBron consistently, but I mean, he's at least a two-way guy who could help you in the playoffs. So that's a situation that you can definitely justify. I mean, they're going to be paying the tax next year anyway. They can afford – I mean, they're going to have to get off some money in different ways. Depending on what they do, the George Hill trade, they could have to stretch guys next year. There's a lot of moving parts, but that's the most justifiable returning asset, because you could be looking at someone conceptually like a Mo Bamba, like we're going to talk about in a second. And I think that is a worthwhile return for an Aaron Gordon type. It has to be a prospect that is a high-level prospect that has substantial upside if you're going to move your best player.
So I guess that the question that we should finish on Aaron Gordon is just like, how much do you believe in Aaron Gordon? Like, do you think that he can be a star player in the NBA, or do you think that his shooting downturn over the course of the last, what do we want to call it? Let's call it, month or so. I mean, since, let's see, December 28th, he's shooting 25% from 3 on 7 3-point attempts a game. Like, do we just not believe in him as a shooter enough to hope that he can develop? I mean, if he can shoot, he can be an all-star in the NBA.
I agree. I think if he can shoot, he brings value, more of like a superstar role player type. He's not like a high-level creator, but he can do the things that you want from like a modern 4, like attack closeouts in big spaces. He has the explosiveness to finish. He can pass a little bit on the move. Yeah. And he can defend, too. He can defend on the perimeter. I think his defense is probably a little overrated by a lot of people, but he's still a capable defense. Yeah, he's still a capable defensive player. Like, he can play in space, protect the rim a little bit from the weak side. So I agree with you. I think that he can be an all-star caliber player. Maybe he doesn't ever score enough to be an all-star, like by the selection, but by value. He was clearly going to regress, though, shooting. The start he got off to this year was not sustainable. But I buy him as like maybe a league average 3-point shooter, and you can still do a lot with that.
If he can turn himself into a true 35% 3-point shooter, he can be an all-star in the NBA. Like, I genuinely just believe that. He's that good. We'll see whether or not the Magic decide to trade him. Let's move on, though. Let's talk about a guy that has been really interesting over the course of the last month and a half in Mohamed Bamba. He's going to be our main focus of today's NBA draft breakdown because I find him fascinating in many ways as an NBA draft prospect. He is just the hardest guy to evaluate. Like, he's kind of a player that you and I have shit on a little bit. Almost, wouldn't you say? Like, for what his, ceiling is and what he can be and what we certainly believe his potential is capable of reaching, we haven't been overly complimentary of him.
No, I a lot of his current issues, though, this is what makes him so hard to project, and he's probably one of the hardest guys to project in the draft, even though I think he's kind of a clear-cut player. It's just so much is tied to work ethic and tangibles and strength acquisition, like we've talked about, adding to the proper muscles in his body so he can anchor a defense, so he has the proper girth. I think he flashes a lot. I mean, he's continued to show, like, he had an attacking closeout move where he dunked on the move. He can do things that maybe he's not allowed to do in Texas' system. Every time he dives to the hoop in a roll, like, both perimeter wings from the opposite team crash down and kind of take that away because Texas doesn't have the requisite spacing, especially without Andrew Jones.
Right.
So you have to think about context when evaluating him. He posts up, I believe the last time I checked, like over 30% of his distribution was post-ups. He doesn't have the frame to anchor there. He doesn't have the girth to establish position. That's not how he's going to be utilized. So it's tough because I think the part we've given him the most issues with is a lot of this is hypothetical. Like, hypothetically, can he shoot? Hypothetically, can he dribble? Hypothetically, can he pass? And those are questions that we just don't have good enough answers to in his current setting.
So what has been impressive to me over his last 11 games has been the way that he has turned potential into production, I guess. So he's averaging 15.5 points, 12 rebounds, and 4.7 blocks over the course of his last 11 games. I have been relatively more impressed with the jump shot as the season has gone on. It has continued to improve over that 11-game stretch. He's shooting like 38% from three. That's a really good sign. I like the fact that he has been more aggressive on the defensive glass. I like the fact that he has been more aggressive when diving to the basket. He has generally just done a really good job of playing up to what his physical athletic gifts are. There's also this. Over the course of those 11 games that I mentioned, Mohamed Bamba, Texas, whenever Mohamed Bamba is on the floor, they have a 105 offensive rating and a 100 defensive rating. When Mohamed Bamba is off the floor, they have a 97 offensive rating and a 111 defensive rating. So basically, they are, a 5-point, they're plus 5 per 100 possessions when Mohamed Bamba is on the floor, and they are minus 14 per 100 possessions when he is off the floor. And, the numbers, part of it is, teams are shooting 46% from three whenever he's off the floor. That's something that has nothing to do with him and is probably not all that sustainable. But it's also not making up for the 11 points per 100 possessions either. Like, it is remarkable how much Texas falls apart when he's off the floor now.
And that's kind of the opposite from the start of the season, right? I remember at a certain standpoint, like, he wasn't a plus. Like, he was a minus. Texas was better defensively with him off the floor. It was a negligible amount, but it wasn't impacting the game like you would think that somebody would that has his kind of physical tools. Because guys are legit scared to drive at him because he wipes away everything around the rim. He'll challenge everything, and he deters so much that we can't even calculate via statistics because it doesn't capture just the unwillingness to go and challenge him at times. So I agree. I think that the motor and just the production added to his physical tools, you need to see it. And because so much of his upside is tied to the strength and it's also tied to these skill developments, I don't know whether or not to buy the shot or not. I think it's a gray area skill for me. I think he can shoot potentially. I'm also not totally sold on the shot. You know what I mean? Like, it's in the middle for me. It's projectable, even though the mechanics aren't great. He has the natural touch. He's good enough from the foul line where you think maybe he can improve over time. He's a ceiling play. He's always kind of been a ceiling play with so many of his alluring physical traits combined with how he profiles into valuable basketball at the next level as a defensive anchor.
So I totally agree with you that he's a ceiling play. I just wonder if the floor is better than what we've been portraying. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to average this, if you're going to be this productive over the course of 11 games, I guess now, like, if he continues this down the stretch and, it's over 20, 25 games at the end of the year, it's going to be really hard for me to say that he's theoretical in any way. Like, this would be a remarkable kind of comeback, or not even comeback. It'd be pretty remarkable in terms of both safety and upside to me, right? Like, if he was in, let's say, a totally different draft class, right? Like, let's say the 2016 NBA draft, he probably pretty clearly goes number 2 behind Ben Simmons, right?
100%. That's been my argument the entire time for these upper tier guys. I have never had Bamba below 6. I still believed in the floor wasn't great. It was solid. It was like, I couldn't see him being anything worse than like a backup 5. He just has too many physical traits, so he's not going to fall out of the league. But it just comes down to this draft class, how it's so many guys are like that. We have like 6 or 7 guys who could go number 1 or number 2 in most drafts. So it's tough to kind of decipher between the value. But the ceiling has always been the most driving force for me, just because you've seen that manifest on the court. His floor is a little bit lower than some other guys. It's lower than Bagley's as far as production. It's a little bit harder to see him unless he meets certain thresholds in certain facets. But again, we have to consider the context of Texas. He's not going to be utilized like this at all at the next level. I mean, hopefully he's going to be in his spread pick and roll. He's got the screening issues with his frame, but he's going to have more space to dive, make himself available. So it's not going to be this post up playing with 2 bigs, no spacing kind of system. It just does not benefit him at all.
Yeah, so I think that the next question naturally is, where do you have Mohamed Bamba on your board with all of the knowledge that we now have? So I will say that on my last big board that I released last week, I had Mohamed Bamba at number 7. I think I was very clearly wrong to have him that low. What do you think of Mohamed Bamba?
I have him 6 still. Honestly, it just comes down to, I mean, you can make arguments for moving him up. If we find out about Porter's injury, if that's a minus, you move him down. If you're not comfortable with Porter, just as far as if you're valuing safety in the top 5, I get the argument moving him down. But just a guy like Trae Young, it's hard to argue. I mean, all these guys are good. So I'll listen to any credible argument about this. I don't think that's set in stone. I still have him 6, and I really like him. I think that's the way this draft is kind of played out at the top, is there's a lot of guys that I like. It's just kind of having to value certain skill sets and certain roles at the next level. It's not so much an indictment on Bamba. It's more like pro other prospects in this class.
Yeah, no, I think that's a totally fair point. Realistically, but I don't think I can have him ahead of Jaren Jackson anymore. I really like Jaren Jackson. I think Jaren's a great prospect, but I just don't know that I can realistically think that he is a worse prospect than Jaren Jackson, given what he's shown recently.
Yeah, I can't. I'm a huge Jaren Jackson guy.
I know you are. You're a stan. You love him.
I do. I think that if we're talking about defensive upside, and this is what it comes down to, maybe you can argue Bamba's is a little bit higher just with the freakish tools, but yeah. Jaren is just so consistent defensively. His motor just never, his instincts, all of that stuff is there. And that's the kind of stuff that you look at with the consistently elite defenders in the league, like a Draymond Green type. What makes him so great outside of the versatility, the IQ? It's just that consistent focus, that consistent every night he quarterbacks your defense. So that's what I like about Jaren. And then his shot to me is more projectable than Bamba's is at this juncture. I know it doesn't look good, but just history is on his side. But I'm very willing to listen to the same tier, all that stuff. That's fair game. It just kind of comes down to what your preference is. Outside of the top 7 or 8 guys, like McHale's number 8 for me, and then you can kind of argue whatever you want. But in that top kind of 2 to 7, 8-ish range, I'll listen to a bunch of different arguments.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. One last thing I want to talk about with Bamba is the jump shot. It's still a very slow release, which scares me a little bit. He'll get a little bit more time on closeouts in the NBA just because defenders have to go a further distance to close out on shooters. And, the length isn't necessarily going to be an issue to bother him. You know what I mean? Defenders just aren't going to be able to affect his jump shot in the same way that they affect guys who are 6'6", their jump shot, because Bamba's release point and his, just overall height is so tall, right? I'm a little bit worried about the slow jump shot, but mechanically the release looks pretty clean. I like the fact that jump shot looks like it actually can grow into something going forward.
Yeah, it's not broken by any means. He brings it to the side of his head a little bit, and like you noted, the slowness of the release. He had a couple face-up jumpers, and just his length extension, he can shoot over the top of guys, but it's an easier shot to contest than a guy who just brings it up to the top of his forehead and it's a quicker release. So I do worry a little bit. If you're talking about closeouts at the 5, I totally agree with you. I think he's going to be fine there. It just comes down to
it's also not like Sindarius Thornwell last year either, where Thornwell had a set shot and was 6'5".
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, in the situations he's going to shoot at, if he's pick and pop, he's just spotting up from the top. If he can shoot an above the break NBA 3, or if he's a corner 3-point shooter, that reduces his range a little bit just because guys can close out on him quicker in the corner. Yeah. But I'm not worried about him in spot-up situations. I'm with you there. He has the touch. I think that's the thing that you always look at with him is just the touch is there, like it is with a lot of these big men. It just comes down to who you buy the most, because not all of them are probably going to shoot, but all of them have a chance to shoot. And Bamba has certain indicators that are in his favor.
Yeah, like I think that Jaren Jackson is a better shooter than Mohamed Bamba, and probably will always be a better shooter than Mohamed Bamba. But I just look at the physical tools that Bamba has, and it's hard for me to think that, okay, Jackson is going to be, but Jackson's also like a year and a half younger than Bamba too. I don't know, man. This draft's hard. This draft is so hard.
It's real hard at the top, man. And then like you start getting into like different factors of shooting, like pull-up jumpers. That's something where Bagley profiles better, and he's better at getting to his pull-up. Jaren has that shot a little bit away from his body. Honestly, that's the one negative I see with Jaren that's actually I think could be long-term is like it's more of like he goes away from his body with the shots a little bit lower. And I don't know how well that profiles off the dribble. And that's kind of where we're at with these bigs is like we're deciphering between that heightened scrutiny because everybody's so damn good. You have to look for like subtle differences.
Yeah, no, and like I don't think that Bamba's ever really going to shoot the ball off the dribble either. That's definitely worth bringing up too. Yeah, I think that I have Mohamed Bamba at like number 4 on my board right now, just to kind of bring it up and close it off based on what that question was. He's just a freak right now, and I am very excited to see the way this season ends for him. I would have him ahead of Trae Young on my draft board, which is strange, but I think that the physical tools are what they are, and it's hard to get over them whenever you're talking about transition and translation to the NBA. So let's talk about another guy who has terrific physical tools for his position, Lonnie Walker. Lonnie Walker is 6'4", has pretty long arms. I believe it's right around a 6'9" wingspan. But he's really, really been terrific throughout the course of the last few weeks, I would say. It's been a 6-game run, right, Cole?
Exactly. Yeah, 6 games.
So what Lonnie Walker has done over the course of his last 6 games, it's been remarkable. 18.5 points, 4 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 45% field goal, 42% from 3, 86% from the foul line. Obviously that's like right around a 64-ish, 65-ish% true shooting percentage, I think. So he is a player that started the year very slowly. In large part, I would guess, and I don't know this for sure, but I talked to Jim Larinaga in the preseason, and he said that they were bringing Lonnie along slowly due to the fact that he had knee surgery in the summer. And I don't know if that's why he had games where he was scoring 5 points against Florida A&M, 5 points against LaSalle, 7 points against North Florida. But it's like, especially given the fact that he was playing 20 minutes a game in that time. But on the same token, I think it's worth bringing up that he just might have taken a little bit longer to adjust because he didn't have a full preseason, didn't have, the ability to gain absolute trust from his coaching staff during that portion of the season. There was a reason that Chris Likes was playing more minutes than he was early in the year, but now that's obviously changed, and we're starting to see all of the physical tools on display with Walker, and that's a really good sign. What have been your impressions of Walker during this little 6-game run where he's averaging that 18.5 points in games against Clemson, Duke, NC State, Louisville, Florida State, and a sort of Division I team in Pittsburgh?
So like we've talked about in the past, we've always liked his compact jump shot. I think that was definitely projectable, even if he's shooting better recently. I always kind of believed in his shot. I was waiting to see the more ancillary effects of his game, like the more ancillary contributions, so the slashing game, getting to the rim, seeing that craft, the explosiveness, and we've seen a little bit of that, and that goes along with confidence and aggressiveness. So he's kind of been more of a slashing type. He's getting into the basket. He's getting these right-hand extension finishes, a little bit of up and under craft with his left. And defensively, I mean, he's had the quicks on the perimeter as far as he's good laterally. Like I think he can be a switch asset probably most of the time with 2 positions, but some 3. I think he has the length and the frame to kind of do that. I also think he's become better as a team defender. I don't know if he's quite there yet, but maybe that's just an adjustment to the college game and just getting more confident. But he's making more rotations. He's made a couple really impressive rotations of late, just knowing his opposition, rotating over for steals And that's kind of the stuff that's going to win you over. It's not just about the compact shooting and being like the 6'4", 6'10" wingspan guy with a good frame. It's can you contribute playmaking? Can you contribute getting to the rim and then being a two-way player? He's just starting to answer those questions now.
Yeah, I particularly have always liked the way that he is able to attack closeouts. He's always been very, very comfortable with that. I think he looks a little bit more explosive over the course of this time as well than he was early in the season. You just kind of look at what he's able to do jumping off of both 1 feet and 2 feet now. He can actually kind of attack the rim in a way that he wasn't able to early in the year, or at least didn't look comfortable doing early in the year. The jump shot, it was always going to regress. I think we felt there was no question there. He's just too good of a jump shooter to not shoot at least 36% from three, which is what he's at right now. I think that at the end of the day, he's going to be a lottery pick. I had him like in the 20s on my last big board. I think he's going to be a lottery pick at this stage. I would move him up to like number 15 or so, given what we've seen over that time.
And I had him, I think, in my 12 to 18 range recently, and I'm firmly with that. I think that he could easily rise. We've talked about this in the past, again, as far as after maybe 10 or 11, this draft kind of drops off a little bit. Kevin Knox hasn't really done. I mean, he had that one big game, 34-point game, but he hasn't consistently seized that spot yet. Nor is anybody else in that range. Just kind of up for grabs. You got guys like Rob Williams in there, Daniel Gafford types. Lonnie could easily rise to the top of that tier. I mean, we're talking about a wing who can shoot the ball and might be able to defend as well at the NBA level. So that's a two-way wing, high commodity guy. I can totally see that. Right.
And, I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's been better than Wendell Carter this year or better than Kevin Knox this year. But on the same level, like, we both consider Carter and Knox in that tier above these guys. And if you told me that Lonnie Walker goes ahead of these guys in the draft, I would not say that that is crazy. I would be surprised if he would go over someone like Mikal Bridges, just given Bridges' physical tools and his ability to shoot already and his tailor-made defensive game for the NBA. Just physically, he's going to be good basically from the jump. So I would be happier to take him than Lonnie Walker. But in that next little level, like if you told me he goes ahead of Miles Bridges or Wendell Carter or Kevin Knox, I don't think I would say that that's crazy at the end of the day. In fact, I think that that is possible, that he ends up in that tier as opposed to the tier, involving Gafford and Robert Williams and those guys.
Yeah, that's fair. What do you think about this? I don't think he's going to rise this far, but do you think there's ever going to be an argument when it comes to Sexton versus Lonnie Walker, or is Sexton so far ahead that that's not going to be an actual realistic option at the draft?
I mean, like if your team is set at point guard already and your team is set at center already or something like that, like I'm trying to think of a team where that could work out. Like if you're Sacramento, like I could see that. Like if Sacramento was to win some games late and end up at like number 9, like along that line, right? Maybe you could see that. Maybe Philadelphia, like because Philadelphia probably wouldn't want to add a non-shooter like Sexton at point guard, right?
Yeah, I think that's where we're getting at as far as positional value. Walker's probably going to rise just because of that. And I'm not saying the talent isn't there. I've always thought he was talented. I mean, we didn't manifest early in the season probably because of injury and role. Again, Miami has so many ball handlers on that team. I would have liked to see him more in a system where he can handle the ball more. We see more of his playmaking distribution, but that probably wouldn't have been an option anyway with his injury status. But he has a relatively high ceiling. I don't know if he's got like a crazy high ceiling, but he's definitely got like a starting two-way player on a good team kind of ceiling, and that's really alluring when you start getting into the late lottery range. We're talking about the most coveted position in basketball right now. Yeah,
I agree with you. I think that is his ceiling. I think he can be a good starter in the NBA. I mean, like the Clippers will probably take just the best player available. They have potentially 2 picks in that 10 to 15 range. I think Utah probably takes the best player available because you can realistically consider Donovan Mitchell a 1 or a 2. I think New York probably takes best player available in the backcourt, right? Like, you could play Ntilikina at the 1, or you could put him next to a guy like Sexton.
Exactly.
So, I don't know that positional value is going to come into play, like, in a major way there. Like, Cleveland's going to take the best player available. Charlotte is probably going to take the best player available just because we don't know what Kemba Walker is going to do long term. Philadelphia, I think maybe you can make an argument for positionality one over the other. Chicago, maybe if you believe they're going to pay Zach LaVine this summer, you might be able to make a positional argument one way or the other. They should probably just take Mikal Bridges, to be honest. They really need a wing badly. But I don't know. We'll see. I think that Lonnie, though, is going to be in that range more so than the 20 range, which is where I had him last time.
Yeah, and within each tier, who knows how teams categorize as far as Lonnie could be the best player available just because he plays the wing and he's in the same tier as some of these other guys. So maybe they just bump him up. I don't know how the NBA does it, but that makes some sense. I think what we're trying to say is he has real equity in the lottery. I think that's the overall takeaway is, he's a real player, and we're starting to see that over the last 6 games. So you haven't seen Lonnie, definitely check him out.
Yep. Do you have anything else you want to chat about real quick before we get out of here?
I think that's good. Honestly, I haven't watched too much college other than Duke over the last kind of week, so I don't really have any insights to add.
Yeah, no, I don't really have anything else. I wrote about Josh Reeves on Friday. I would suggest people go read that. His on-off numbers are hilarious for
Love Josh.
Penn State. Like, they are comically ridiculous. They are a plus 22 point per 100 possession team with him on the floor. They are a -2 team with him off the floor. He is ridiculous, and part of that is noisy. Like, he missed 4 Big Ten games. He has the full non-conference season to go, like, rack up numbers there. But if you even look at the Big Ten season, those numbers are very, very strong in terms of on-off. I would suggest that he's probably one of the 5 best perimeter defenders in the country and can shoot threes and just makes plays. I'm a big fan of him. Cole is a bigger fan of him than I am. Cole has him at like 30s on your board?
I think he's 30s. Yeah, he might be late 20s, honestly. I'm a huge fan. I love the instincts. I love the athleticism. I think, honestly, Lonzo kind of made me like him a little more just as like a weak side defender and just being able to make decisions and having the athleticism to kind of act in that role. And he's got really awesome passing anticipation. I think it's kind of underrated on that end. I'm a big fan, but he has to shoot. So it's hard to get like super high on him. I mean, the game against, who did he play the other night? Oh, Michigan State, where he impacted the game in several ways, but I think he was like 0 of 5 from 3. And that's going to be his most important input for that kind of guy is, can he shoot the ball consistently from range? If he can, I think he easily can go, he might not go that high, but I think he would be justified in that late 20s, early 30s range. Yeah,
no, it was funny. I was talking to him, and I didn't have like his sports reference page up. So I was like, yeah, if I remember correctly, you shot like 3 for 30 or 3 for 40 or something like that your freshman season from 3. What made you improve? And he goes, 3 for 39. I know the exact number, and like he knew
so good.
Exactly what it was, and like that's something that he motivated himself with to try and improve as a shooter. And he's now shooting 39% from 3 this year, but that's his swing skill. He needs to be able to shoot. Absolutely. I'd probably have him in the 60s right now. Like I don't know if I have no idea if he's going to leave at all, and potentially kind of look at that marketplace, but it's. I don't know if he has enough offensive game yet to where he would be a positive offensive player.
That's fair. I think he has to shoot, and I think he can bring ancillary passing, but it just really, like, that ancillary skill is not going to be as important unless he doesn't space the floor. I think that's the key for a bunch of secondary handlers is you have to be able to shoot in the modern game. If you don't, you better be a damn special defender, and it's hard for 6'4" guys in the NBA to make that kind of difference on the defensive end unless you're Tony Allen.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, he fights on that side of the floor, but despite his size, like he gets matched up with Keita Bates-Diop, he gets matched up with Miles Bridges, but you look at those games, like Miles Bridges caught him for 23 last weekend or last week. Keita Bates-Diop caught him for 25 when they played Ohio State in that win. Like, there's only so much that a guy who's 6'4" can do, and it's not only on him.
Exactly.
Like, he's not the only reason those guys went for 23 and 25 points, but he was, for a large chunk of the time, the primary defender on that guy, or on those guys.
For sure.
Cole, tell the people where they can find your work.
As usual, at thestepien.com. I actually just did a profile breakdown of Lonnie Walker, so I went about a page and a half on all his strengths and weaknesses, so check that out. As usual, the Ode to Odin podcast with Sean Derenthal. We just broke down Mohamed Bamba and DeAndre Ayton for about 2.5 hours last Friday, so you can check that out on the Ode to Odin podcast, and continue to tune in here. Thanks, guys.
Please go rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. We'll be back at some point next week. We'll talk about the trade deadline. We'll talk about some more NBA draft stuff with Cole at some point. But that's about all I got for you now. So until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.